Welcome, everybody, to another fabulous virtual event that is sponsored by the New York HIMSS chapter. Today, cyber warfare. Is your critical IoMT infrastructure ready? Next slide, please. For those of us that are on the line, if you have some trouble, here's some of the logistics. Q&A can be done through the chat line, so if you have a question, please go ahead and put it in there. If you lose it or have any technical difficulties, just click the refresh and you'll be able to come in. If anybody needs any other assistance, go to the website and then take a look and try to get back in again. This event will be recorded and we should have it up on the YouTube page within 24 to 48 hours and then also onto our website, New York State HIMSS chapter. Next slide. We're always looking for people to join our chapter. Here's some information on how to become a member of our New York State chapter. We were the #1 large chapter of the year this last year with HIMSS, and we'd be more than happy to not only look for new members, but also new volunteers. Next slide, please. Let me introduce our two sponsors, the first one being Gigamon. Take a minute here and you can see some of the advantages that they can provide your organization. And then the way to be able to get in touch with them here on the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. Our second sponsor is Armis. Again, take a quick read, see what they can offer your organization, and then look for a way to be able to get back in touch with them. Next slide, please. Well, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Here's our moderator, Dan Didier, who will then take over and work with our two presenters today. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, sponsors.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. We're going to keep this pretty fast-paced, so hopefully everyone's okay with that. We're here really under unfortunate circumstances, I will say. And when I think about healthcare, it's amazing what new capabilities technology has afforded us. Things that weren't reasonable to do just 10 years ago, certainly not 20 years ago, are now commonplace. And our ability to implement and scale technology, especially Internet of Medical Things, cost effectively is pretty amazing. But what was once much simpler to manage, infrastructure, is now diverse, cloud connected, and real time. And I think, as everyone knows, it's not just IT that is purchasing and deploying technology. Everyone in the company is, or so it seems. And we're now globally connected. So with all of these capabilities come risk. And unfortunately, it's also cost effective for cyber criminals and nation states to exploit our dependence on these devices for financial gain. So, I say cost effective as opposed to easily exploitable, as a lot of folks like to say, because this is a business opportunity for them. And that's something that is lost on many of us as we get into the nitty-gritty here. We talk about vulnerabilities and exploits. This is a business, and we're fighting against a hard to identify, highly capable foe. So, they're profit centers, and we're the target. So we're here today to talk with Martin Crew and Oscar Miranda about this issue, specifically around IoMT. And the types of things that we need to do to better protect ourselves and provide patient care. So let's start with intros and get right into it. Martin, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I certainly will. Thanks, Dan, and thank you, Tony, for the introduction at the top level, and thank you to the members of the HIMSS New York chapter for the opportunity to be with you today. So my name is Martin Crew. I work for a company called Gigamon, and we provide what we call deep observability, which is really visibility into all the traffic running across your networks so that you can better secure them from exactly the type of threat that Dan was just describing. And we run, as I say, across the entire network. So although we're focused today on the IoMT side of things, we also provide exactly the same level of capability across the IT landscape within your organization. So from one single source, Gigamon, you can get visibility into all of your traffic and ensure that the threats that are out there and trying to get access to the network are identified and prevented as quickly as possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Oscar, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Again, thanks for having me here also. I'm Oscar Miranda. I'm Field CTO here at Armis. At Armis, we provide a asset intelligence platform. Essentially, we have the capability within our tool to see all connected assets within an organization. I know today we're focusing on IoMT, but if it's connected to your network, whether wireless, wired, Bluetooth, whatever protocol or mechanism by which it's connected to your healthcare organization, we have complete visibility of that asset.
Very nice. And just so everyone knows who the heck I am and why I'm here, my name's Dan Didier. I'm with Grey Castle Security. Been there since about 2012. And we've been working with healthcare as a strategic partner for over 10 years now. So we work with different technologies and partners like Martin and Oscar to help solve the cyber challenge. Our focus is really on building a cybersecurity program, soup to nuts, governance, risk, and compliance, and then providing the services to make that happen. Unfortunately, I've had lots of experience in healthcare, from 3 a.m. calls on Sunday for incident response to OCR audits to some good stuff too, like getting leadership buy-in around what really are priorities. So I think with the group of us here today, we're very well prepared to talk about the topic. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing so everyone can get a close-up of our faces here, whether you like it or not. And let's dive right into this. Let's see. So first off, we see a lot of situations where the complete scope of IoMT, where all of these devices are, how many we have, just isn't known. It's not only how many we have and where they are, but it's what software do they have, what versions are they running, who purchased them, and when, is there support or not? Are you allowed to even patch them, or do you need the vendor to do it for you? And the list kind of goes on and on and on and on with these devices, and it's really complex. My first question to you, Oscar, is, as we start this conversation, I do think it's important to define exactly what IoMT is to make sure we're all on the same page. I understand there are dozens of types of devices, and I'm wondering if you can just explain maybe the breadth and the types of IoMT devices from a high level.
Sure thing, Dan. Internet of Medical Things. So basically all connected assets that support the clinical workflow. The asset that more often than not gets a lot of the press, so to speak, in healthcare are medical devices. Those devices that fall into one of the three categories from an FDA perspective, right? The FDA is the government agency is responsible for regulating and ensuring the safety of these medical devices in a healthcare setting. But as we know, when you look at the clinical workflow, it's more than just your traditional medical devices. The prime example that I like to use is the self-registration kiosk. We know in healthcare today, we have a shortage of clinical staff, especially on nurses. So the reality is that healthcare organizations have to leverage things like kiosks to allow the ability for members to actually self-register. That's one example. That's the entry point. We also have other supporting devices like lab systems. When you send a specimen out to the lab, that system is part of the clinical workflow. Another system that we highlighted about a year or so ago, the pneumatic tube systems. These are the actual mechanisms by which either lab results or actual specimens get moved around a facility. So understanding that any of these non-medical device, non-FDA regulated devices are compromised or interrupted, they would impact the clinical workflow as a whole because they're integral to that. So when you think of IoMT, think of all the connected devices that support the clinical workflow.
Gotcha. So a device could look like a regular old computer, but the reality is you can't touch it, you don't know what's on it or in it, and you need the vendor it does a very specialized function. So that's good to know. And then, of course, all the way from things that might be in my body or
wearables, Dan. That's another one, right? Wearables. Now we understand that it's used for telemetry to monitor things, but that's another prime example.
Wonderful. So that's very helpful. And I think the thing that I'll point out is I never know how many there really are, because there seem to be new solutions every day. And when we go back to how we open this up, our capabilities around technology have exploded, and the connectivity has as well, which has brought so much good opportunity, certainly for healthcare, but has also introduced this issue. So moving to the next part here, Martin, how important then is it to have a complete inventory of these devices? And I guess, how big of a threat are these devices to us?
Yeah, so two good questions there, Dan. So to the first, it's absolutely critical to have an inventory of these assets and for that inventory to be dynamically maintained. The average large-scale hospital has tens of thousands of these devices now. Maybe you or Oscar have got the number in your head, but I mean, the number I've seen several times is upwards of 30,000 devices is fairly normal. So knowing exactly what you've got is critical. And I know, the experience that Oscar and I have got within healthcare groups is when we go into organizations like this, typically organizations underestimate the number of these assets by 40 or 50%. They also, from the IT side of things, underestimate the number of applications they often have. So there is a real pressing need to understand exactly what assets you've got and also where they are. You mentioned wearables, but a lot of these devices are mobile. So, I mean, a crash cart now might have tens of these devices, and it may move around within an organization. So keeping track of exactly where these devices are is critical. So to the security question, I mean, one of the fundamentals of security that I think we'd all subscribe to is that you have to be able to see a device to be able to secure it. So this idea of having an asset inventory and then being able to see all the traffic that's going to that device, coming out from that device, and being able to verify that the traffic the device is generating is compatible with its function is absolutely critical. So I think these two things really play together, but are both critical to ensuring that IoMT, like everything else within a healthcare organization, is visible and is secure.
Yeah, I mean, you summed it up quite well. Like, I have to be able to see a device to secure it, right? If it's just floating around somewhere and I maybe think I know about it or not, I mean, then it's clear that I am not really keeping track of, is it vulnerable? Is it secure? Do I have to do something with it? So really great insights. I think this sets us up well to talk kind of about my next question for you, which really relates to, you just said, there's tens of thousands of devices, and yes, we actually, I had the opportunity to moderate another panel prior where some of the CTOs, CISOs talked to this problem where they had almost 100,000 devices when they actually wrapped their arms around it. But it's also the dozens and dozens and dozens of vendors that have provided those devices, right? And one of the things that we hear a lot about is vendor risk management. But it really takes on a new meaning from an IoMT perspective, because it's not what IT is used to managing from a software or hardware perspective. We're purchasing it not through IT, but through various business units. So, when working with vendors on product acquisition, specifically around IoMT, we see a lot of, in contractually obligated expectations and alignment around being able to secure and patch and update for a defined time frame within a defined SLA. And a couple of key points here is, not only do you have a device that may have a vulnerability, connected to your network, potentially connecting to applications, as you mentioned, Martin, on your network, but they may also be extracting data to the cloud to be processed by that vendor, to be processed by third parties, and they also have access to your network. So when we think about, healthcare and PHI and HIPAA and security requirements, it's like, this is red flags all over the place, right? We're not really sure what's on the device. We're not really sure if we can secure it or patch it because we don't understand it. it has access to a lot of PHI. It's shipping it off network, or it's giving people access to our network. I mean, as a security professional, my head starts to spin here. So Oscar, if I can ask you, how should we be doing this differently as far as acquiring IoMT, and how should we be working with new or existing vendors to reduce our risk? Are there any insights you can provide here from a contractual perspective that make our lives easier?
Sure. Definitely during the procurement process, there's a lot of information out there that's freely available that, unfortunately, in talking to customers, they're not even fully aware of. They think that these are specific tools or documents just for folks on the HTM or biomedical or clinical engineering side, but definitely cybersecurity folks or IT folks can leverage it too. The first one that comes to mind is you might have heard of it, MDS squared, the manufacturer disclosure statement for medical device security. I know it's a bit of a mouthful. There's a reason they call it MDS squared. Essentially, it's a templated form that consists of about 216 questions that covers around 23 security controls or capabilities. What you can glean from this questionnaire are things around, is there PHI stored on this system? Does it transmit PHI? How does authorization and access to this device function? Are there any audit controls? How do upgrades and patching work on this system? Is the thing even able to be backed up? Is there any data to be backed up on this device? Connectivity capabilities. Do I connect it using wireless, Bluetooth, hardwire? So again, you gain a lot of information from this document, right? And it could be leveraged definitely by cybersecurity professionals, as well as biomedical clinical engineers, to quickly assess, look, from a security standpoint, what am I signing up for from a risk perspective? So that's one document.
Yeah, that's
the second document.
Go ahead, Dan. Yeah, that's the key word here, right? It's vendor risk management. So if you don't understand what you're buying and what risk it introduces to your network, it's pretty hard, if not impossible, to do effective vendor risk management. Like, we all know, just the fact of doing business means you have risk. Some of it you accept, some of it you mitigate, but you have to be able to quantify it. So this notion of using that MDF squared tool is highly valuable to get an understanding of what's going on. And I know NIST also has just released a draft, I believe it is, for some standards around, security around IoMT as well, but we're not there yet. And this is so I think they're good points. There's some good tools out there to help you, but you still own and have to manage this risk. So it is not easy.
At one point, I'll chip in on this. So I think this vendor management issue and the risk associated with it exists at a number of levels. I mean, obviously, there's the discussion that you guys just had, but there's also, how was this product created? What software is inside there? How efficient, how honest, how whatever were the developers in disclosing what's actually in this product? I mean, as we saw with the SolarWinds issue a couple of years ago, you can buy products from extremely reputable people where developers or potentially malicious actors have taken shortcuts or, as I said, behaved maliciously, and they've embedded something in the code that at some point is going to come around and bite you in the butt. And it may be immediately obvious through testing, or it may be something that isn't. It may be something that just sits there and, some event activates it, some circumstance, combination of different factors bring it into play. But this is a really, really difficult issue. And it's one that, as a technology industry, we have to wrestle with to make sure that the steps that customers are putting in place in the vendor risk management aren't undermined by stuff that's either unwittingly or wittingly embedded in the software that all these devices run.
Yeah, to that point, I will say, this notion of vendor risk management is incredibly difficult because just from the issues that you brought up, Martin, I'm like, where do I start? I don't have enough time in the day. You do have to prioritize these vendors from a risk perspective initially so that you can segment your time properly. And another thing, is you have to have the right, what I'll call foundational security controls in place to limit your risk just in general terms for all of these sort of devices. Like they shouldn't all be on a production network, they should be segmented off, and all these sort of things that we've known for 20 plus years now still apply and people still fail to do. But I know people love to kind of say that and everyone's like, well, we can't even do that right. But what I will say is people don't talk about the reason for that. And one of those that I see is it used to be you couldn't do anything in an organization around technology without IT being involved in the purchase and deployment of it. So they had full visibility. And honestly, we've seen a lot of what I call personal heroics on behalf of these IT teams where they've stepped way beyond their bounds to the security realm, and they always tried to do the best thing and put a lot of extra effort in to secure these systems, even though the people in the other business units don't know what they're talking about, get frustrated, and we just want to buy it and go, right? But now what's happening is you have these different business units purchasing either a service or devices, and they don't need IT. They just click some buttons, stuff shows up, it's connected and it works. That became very obvious when cloud-based services became highly available. Finance just moved all their stuff to the cloud automatically, and IT didn't even know about it. So you created this void. Not you, Martin, but somebody created these voids. And again, go back to this massive growth in technology and capability and scale. And we kind of moved the problem, to the left or to the right, and we left some pieces out in the middle that were kind of keeping it all together, which is IT. And make no mistake, IT doesn't inherently own security, right? So I'm just kind of adding to what I have seen as some of the challenges. When I go back and think about all this, we certainly need to understand what we're buying and who we're buying it from. And to your point, Martin, what's in the darn thing? I mean, if anyone's heard about the big issue with Atlassian, Atlassian makes documentation tools like Confluence and IT help desk tools like Jira and development tools. If you listen to NPR, you've heard Atlassian advertisements. They had a hard-coded password in their code.
Yeah.
It's 2022, right? We knew this was a bad idea 20 plus years ago. So to your point, what's in the darn thing? Can we trust it? And how much time do you have? So when I boil this all down, I think maybe bring this back, what are our expectations for security? How do we prioritize and how do we wrap our arms around it? One thing I always come back to is I need an inventory of all of my devices so I can say, do I know what the heck that is and who bought that and why is it on our network? Can I just shut it off? Is it actually a rogue device? Having that visibility helps you to better do vendor risk management. And look, if you've done a good job on vendor risk management, I should be able to line that up with the devices on my network, right? And if I have certain contractual requirements like SLAs for patching or identifying vulnerabilities, I need to fact check that. I need to be in control. So, Oscar, Martin, I throw it back at you. Is this something that you see as a primary challenge? Is it something that you see us being able to overcome, or is it still hard to get there?
So Dan, if I may, Martin, Uncle Sam has heard it. You probably heard the Patch Act. Finally went through the Congress, passed the Senate. It's actually on President Biden's desk now. What the Patch Act does once it becomes law, in a nutshell, it basically requires manufacturers of medical devices that are FDA regulated to actually do an assessment of the device and disclose, before they can go to market, all the tools through an SBOM or pieces of software, a software bill of materials, as part of going to market, disclosing all the pieces of software that are used to actually control that device. But more importantly, this is all pre-market, and it's a requirement. I mentioned MDS squared before. That's a voluntary file, because there might be folks out there thinking, wait, I've tried leveraging an MDS squared file, but guess what? the manufacturer didn't have one. Why? Because it's voluntary. Once the Patch Act becomes law, this disclosure is going to become a requirement. It's going to be a mandate. It's not going to be voluntary. It's not going to be a nice to have. It's going to be something that you as a manufacturer, before you could take your medical device to market and sell it, you're going to have to meet these requirements. So we're finally seeing some teeth put around these documents.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sorry, these devices. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, like we see, after a while, you start to see trends, right? Finance is pretty darn good at security because they're highly regulated. Government contractors, they've been doing S-bombs for quite a while now. And finally we're getting the same opportunity in healthcare, which I think is fantastic, right? Because again, to Martin's point, you don't know what's in there. Good luck trying to figure it out. You would spend your whole career doing that if that was your objective, and maybe not get anywhere. So at what point do you just say, you know what, we're just going to trust the vendor and go, which is, I think, honestly, what most people do. But this will give us not only insight, but an actual build of materials, if you would, to understand exactly what's in there, which lets people like me and you and folks on this call hold those vendors accountable, right? Like, hey, you used this software. We know there's a vulnerability. When's the patch coming for your system? As opposed to asking random questions like, hey, have you found any new vulnerabilities? I think that's wonderful. And I think that's something important for folks here to note. What is important too, though, is, this notion of trust but verify. Like, great, I know you're using the software now. So how do I, as someone responsible for ensuring my organization's security, know if those devices have been patched or not? Do I just trust that vendor, or is there anything I can do to get there?
So I think, I think it's a sort of a teamwork approach that's necessary to do that. But I absolutely agree that trust and verify is critical. I mean, we do a lot of work with zero trust systems in government and elsewhere. And initially, this idea of verification was not in the architecture, but now it's coming very much into it. And I think any organization needs to have this trust and verify mentality. So, to the issue that we've discussed here around patching, the ability to verify that the patches have been applied is absolutely critical. But also the ability to just see the traffic that's going to and from these devices and verify that that traffic is consistent with the purpose of that device is equally critical. So knowing, exactly what are these devices communicating with? How are they communicating? Over what protocols? Is there any unexpected activity? All of these things are sort of really important. So as part of building this verification architecture, I think you need to look at what vendors can provide right now. Are there gaps in what those vendors provide? And if there are, who can provide this complete visibility so that you can verify all of these aspects of what's happening on the network?
Yeah.
Real quick to play off of what Martin just said and what you've been highlighting, Dan, around visibility, inventory, has to be contextual. Just because I see a Windows 7 system on my network that's not patched, I need to understand the context of that device. Is it an IT managed device that I can patch immediately or remove from the network? Or is it a system that's part of a medical device that if I take it offline, I'm going to cause disruption? I need that context in addition to having that inventory. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, so context is important also from a security perspective, right? How have I classified this system? One of the things that we spend a lot of time on is building an asset of data, information assets that then resides on information systems. And certainly those information systems inherit risk and levels of security from the data that flows through them, that's stored on them, right? And subsequently, when we do a risk assessment, a HIPAA, an organizational risk assessment, we need to understand those things because they greatly influence the risk of certain gaps or vulnerabilities that you have. And without that, you're kind of blind. So context is absolutely everything in all aspects of security, certainly around managing your IoMT, but then all the other controls that you're either implementing to secure them or depending on also need that context. So I do agree strongly that that's super valuable to someone like me or someone that's responsible for securing their network. Martin, you talked a lot about visibility into flows, and one thing that I really want to talk about is how do you know if you're being attacked, and how should you be monitoring for these sort of things? We hear a lot about managed SOC versus trying to do this internally. Some organizations have dedicated security resources, but even to this day, we usually see it as a sub-bullet of an IT function, which may not be the best approach. Certainly, we know it fails a lot of the time, and I think that puts people in IT in a tough spot too. It's like, not only do we want you to do your day job, which is really hard, keep our systems up and running and make sure we're processing efficiently, but also secure them. So, my question to you, Martin, is, and this might be, I don't know, this might be a little bit unfair, but, can internal IT effectively monitor, respond, and mitigate attacks by what we defined earlier as highly competent, motivated businesses designed to exploit you for financial gain? What I know is we need people, technology, and process to do that. There's no silver bullet. You also need the expertise. And the icing on the cake is you need a 24/7, 365, right? So unless you want to put in 24/7, 365 IT team to also do security, you might not get there. But that being said, we need to start somewhere. Whether we outsource that or not, internally, we need to have, just like we talked about with a vendor, we need to have some sort of understanding of what's going on in our network. I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on what do we need to do a good job here, knowing this is highly complex and differs from organization to organization. What are some of the bare minimums?
Yeah, so a lot to unpack in that question, Dan. You're absolutely right. This is a very, very difficult situation, and we all need to acknowledge that, and people need to be prepared to be patient in understanding there's no overnight fix here. So let's just explore a few things. First, we all know that in the IT industry in general, and in security in particular, there is a lack of skilled resources. And we know that impacts most organizations. And when we do an annual survey, most of our customers go into the year with 20 to 30% fewer resources than they actually need to do the job they see at the beginning of the year. And then that job evolves over the course of the year. There's new threats coming in all the time. So how do you stay on top of that? So it's very, very difficult for any organization, no matter what level of resource they've got, to do this. So a few observations. We've clearly seen security grow as a separate group within IT organizations. And I think we're now seeing them come back together again, because organizations are realizing that the network is the medium through which these attacks are going to flow. It's also the single source of truth about what's happening within the organization. So security has to have full access and full visibility into what's happening at the network level. So the coming together of these things, both through common tools so that they're seeing exactly the same information, more robust processes that are stress tested on a regular basis, given the new threats and the new adversaries coming into the market, and then the constant training of people. So I think there's a lot that comes into play here. Another thing that you mentioned is, where do third parties play? And I think third parties do have a good role, because third parties can come in and they've got potentially different skill sets. They can potentially be more dynamic in bringing the right resources to bear in particular situations. So I think having relationships with third-party security providers is critical. One of the things that we do within our own network detection product is we don't just provide a product to our customers, we actually provide an applied technology threat team. So this is a group of people who will team up with your own SOC analysts so that when an event occurs on the network, it's not just your folks looking at it, it's people with experience of hundreds of different organizations looking at that event with you and providing the context around it that says, hey, this is something we've seen before, or I've not seen this exactly before, but here's how I know I'd go about approaching the identification and remediation of this. So I think the role of third parties is important, and I think it's going to become increasingly important as we move forward, because no IT organization, no internal security organization is ever going to have the right tools, resources, funding to do everything. So I think you're going to have to partner up to get the security level to where you need it to be.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think as we move forward here in time, organizations are going to take different approaches. But one thing I think will remain constant is you can never build the depth and knowledge of expertise and capability that you need on demand when you need it, right? You don't need it. This is the thing, right, about this notion. Everyone likes to talk 24/7, 365. You don't need 24/7, 365 all the time, only when you need it, right? But you need it when you need it, and you don't know when that's going to be. So which way do you want to go? Do you want to build out a full capability internally to do that, or do you want to look at a way to kind of cost share that time with other organizations by working with a third party? I think it's a really viable question. I think the answer on how that works best in today's day and age has been, at least right now, has been confirmed, right? You need to work with third parties, as you say. But I'm curious, Oscar, any other thoughts on, is there a minimum internal foundational position you should be in? Have you seen certain things work or not work well?
Well, I could tell you based on our customer that we have these conversations with in healthcare, definitely comes down to funding. Obviously, the larger systems have the funding to essentially build an in-house 24/7, essentially a SOC. Yeah. Obviously, the mid to smaller systems don't, but even the large ones, they have to supplement it. You talked about, leveraging third parties. You want that diversity, right? Not to get too much in the weeds. When you look at like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it talks about the techniques and processes, right, that the threat actors use to actually launch campaigns. Well, the fact is that when you look at certain frameworks, you say, well, this particular campaign is focusing financial services. It's not specific to healthcare. Well, there's nothing to prevent it from crossing over. So you need a third-party supplement who actually has experience looking at all industries. They didn't even look at it from an industry perspective. They really look at it from an attack or a campaign, so they can bring that expertise. I know that all the news or all the feeds that you're getting, threat intel feeds, say that this particular campaign is only focusing this specific group in this part of the world. But I could tell you that what we're seeing is some of it's bleeding over here in your backyard, and you should be vigilant about it, right?
Yeah.
But to your original question, can healthcare organizations really build it internally? Yes, but the fact is it's not enough. And now you have to look at funding. You touched on it. Do I really need 24/7 all the time? Can I supplement that? And we have seen, even with larger systems, actually look at bringing in a hybrid model where maybe the level 1, level 2 triaging is outsourced, and the level 3 or 4 or the incident response team actually stays in-house. So it's a blend, because as Martin touched on it, there's a shortage. Like you hear it in the news all the time. Like cybersecurity professionals are not growing on trees. So you're dealing with a very limited resource in cybersecurity, despite the fact that the threat landscape is growing exponentially. Even with Common Core math, that's not good.
Yeah, that's true. And I would say not all cybersecurity roles require the same cybersecurity knowledge and experience. It's very broad, very wide. So I think, it gets taken out of context a lot by folks when they say there's a shortage. There's a lot of people that would like to work in cybersecurity, but their skill set and experience doesn't really line up with what people are looking for.
Right.
And I think part of that has to do with just the fast pace of change, the rate of change that we're in, and the complexity of the problem. So to that point, we know, I think we've thoroughly established having visibility into your network, the devices on your network, not just IoMT, but the things they're talking with, either inside your network or outside your network, and whether that's normal traffic or not normal traffic, or I'd call that, that's, you go to see your physician once a year, and you better be doing those as your minimal, right? How are you doing? Like that's what that equates to. I wonder if we can talk a little bit though about some of these other security controls. We don't just focus on technology, of course, but there's people, there's process and technology. One thing that is obvious: if you don't know something exists, you can't secure it. Which Martin, you crushed that earlier with your very simple statement. I'm wondering, you've both been around a while, you've seen a lot of things. Are there any stories or insights you can share with us? Kind of where I'm going with this is, and one thing that I know really well, Gray Castle does incident response. So 24/7, 365, there it is. The red phone rings and we deploy parachutes and all this stuff. And you never know when it's going to ring, but there's one lesson that never has ever, failed, which is we're always surprised by something. If we knew how to solve this problem, we wouldn't be here, as people like to say, but it's true. And you need to stay open-minded. And this is something that can be really difficult to do. And I've seen this problem persist, unfortunately, a lot, which is people think they know what's going on. And then, they act on that. And that, in fact, wasn't the case. Like they thought they understand maybe what happened, the root cause, and eliminated it. Okay, we're done. Let's move on to the next thing. But are there other security controls that we should be focusing on as part of this visibility that you want to make sure to highlight here, from your experiences for the folks on the call? What else should we be doing is really what I'm asking.
I'll take a stab at it, Dan, if I may. Go ahead. No, you get it first. You sure?
You can both go. Yeah, let's have a good conversation here.
So the first one, very fundamental. What traffic do you allow out to the internet by default? More often than not, people take that for granted. They just assume that the department that's in charge of the firewall already has the right rules in place to control access. I could tell you time and time again, when we do what we call a proof of value with a potential customer, we deploy, we monitor for anywhere from 7 days to 30 days, depending on the size of their environment, and we do a readout. The common thing that comes up in healthcare organizations is IT, and in some cases, even biomed, are surprised that PHI is being transmitted outside the organization to a cloud-based solution. And unfortunately, I've been in conversations where we're challenged. I had a CISO adamantly just say, that's just not possible. We went through this, yada, yada, yada. He actually went as far as calling the chief medical officer, bringing them on our readout to say, hey, according to Armis, they're seeing this traffic. Is this even possible? So once we showed them, hey, we see it's a particular EMR system, it's talking to its cloud-based component, and we see that traffic, and more importantly, we see PHI. I could tell you the silence was deafening. Actually, come to think of it, we brought in a new billing module. We weren't able to enable it on our on-prem solution, so as a short-term fix, we actually turned on the cloud capability, and it seems like we forgot to turn it off. That's what it is.
You bring up something that's very near and dear to me, which is turn it off by default. Like, so what technically egress filtering, right, means I'm not gonna let anything leave. And here's what's interesting. Like, if you think about this, you get attacked, someone puts something in your network, they got it on your system, they go out and it doesn't work. Well, you may have just avoided a really bad time. And if we think about go back to vendor risk management, one of the things that would make sense for people to require, kind of that SBOM, is what systems, it means specific systems, like give me an IP range and ports will your systems need to talk to, because by default, we don't allow any outbound traffic. And vendors' heads sometimes explode and say, well, we need outbound, allow it. Well, when you do that, you're allowing traffic to everywhere in the world on any port possible, which is probably a really bad idea. And we know from experience that this one control that you're talking about now, where do you need to go and what type of traffic are you sending? And then implementing a very simple control in your already existing firewall that everyone assumes we're already doing, but we're not because it's too hard to get done. And because someone other than IT is implementing these solutions or security, this can be a major either strength or a major weakness. And I couldn't agree more that this is one of those really important controls that you can wrap into the whole process here. These devices need to talk to these systems on these ports and block everything else. Get your vendor to tell you what that is, or it isn't getting out, right? And you're not going to buy a solution from a vendor if it doesn't work. So the vendors.
Dan, you're being too nice. I know you're the moderator, but let's call it, like, I'm sure you've seen it. When you ask the question, what ports do you need for your application to function? More than half the time, the answer is, I don't know.
Right.
You're talking to the manufacturer.
Well,
why? Because most likely they don't even have an SBOM. They don't even know all the different libraries, all the different, they don't really understand it. So to your point, fair enough, you don't know. You're not the first, and unfortunately, you won't be the last. But by default, we block all traffic. We're going to have to go old school here. We're going to look at the IP address of your tool, of your application, and as it's trying to communicating out through the firewall, we're going to see the denies, and we're just going to start building a rule that way. Not the most optimal way, but the reality is that's a very common scenario.
Yeah,
and it's not just healthcare.
Exactly. Like I talk about other industries, finance is used to doing this for a long time now. A couple other quick best practices, and Martin, I'm going to ask you to give us some of your insights around some other foundational controls. But by default, block all communication to, I don't know, whole regions like Asia or Russia or anywhere else that you do not, South America, that you cannot fathom having to ever allow a device on your network to make a connection to, right?
Right.
Pretty good idea. And then from there, maybe lock it down some more and put in some explicit allow only rules. So Martin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of interesting things that have just been said, and I completely agree. A network should be as locked down as makes business sense. Over the last couple of years with COVID and work from home, obviously a lot of applications have been brought onto the network. A lot of cloud applications have been included in receiving traffic from the network, communicating with the network, because organizations had to change, and because IT couldn't respond with all the software, all the processes that business units needed. Mm-hmm. So we went from, I won't say a very secure system, but we went from a system where we understood the known unknowns on the network, and we kind of had our arms around it. It then had to open up, and there was no way around that. But I mean, as it opened up, we saw this explosion of attacks, because as we opened up these new cloud applications, increased communication across a hybrid network, adding all of these devices, the attack surface increased, the vulnerabilities multiplied. And I think we've now got to look at a lot of the drivers behind those decisions and use a very, very simple mechanism, which is to say why. Why is this device talking to that server? Why is this application talking to this other application? Just this very, very basic why is such a good question. And Oscar is exactly right. I mean, the number of times that we get called in with customers and we say, okay, let's look at the traffic. Why is this traffic going through this port? Where is it going to? What's the reason to do it? And people either don't know, or they say, well, it's because it always has done. And, I think we've really got to attack this issue head on. And it's an uncomfortable issue for many organizations, many individuals within organizations. But you've got to understand why these processes are in place, why the communication channels are open, and if there's no good reason, then the default's got to be shut them down.
Right. Now, the other part of that is don't shut down the business by mistake. So you also need to know what you're looking at to a degree, right? And I think one of the things that you're both advocating for is having some sort of tool set that helps you do that, helps you understand what it is and what it is not, and get some help, really, is what it is. So we're coming up on the end here. I want to wrap this up. I'm not a fan of going late on these things. One thing that I do want to maybe kind of just say as a parting thought, and if there are any questions, certainly we're happy to answer those. But over the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen a really steady increase in intrusion and web application attacks in healthcare, right? Mostly motivated by financial gain. But if I go back to like 2015, the top issue in healthcare from a security perspective was privilege misuse. Someone looking at something they shouldn't have looked at, right? Which, was a pretty big deal. It still is a big deal, but we've mostly solved that problem. A lot of the software, the EMR, the software we use has all these controls in place to help prevent that. It's not gone. But we've seen a big shift there. And, the assumption is that this pattern is going to continue and that we do need to remain diligent. And as we move forward, especially when I think about it from what's our job? Our job is patient care. Sorry guys, I don't really care about the technology. I mean, I do, but I'm just talking as an advocate of, for healthcare and what we're really interested in is making sure patients get the care they need when they need it. Worst case scenario is we either don't have the data, or we get the wrong data or outdated data, or we can't get to it at all. We can't use our systems to help. We can't use IoMT effectively, which I know at this point, everybody in healthcare either has experienced something like that firsthand or knows someone, a neighbor or an associate that has. So we're here today to try to help organizations understand what can you do better. Well, how do we wrap our arms around this IoMT challenge? Certainly, they're helpful. Those devices are helping us in many ways from a patient care perspective, but it also is creating, I would say, some unsleepable nights for a lot of folks responsible for making sure they work when they need to work and our networks are secure. Any parting words for everyone on this event before we leave? Is there sunshine at the other end?
I'll go first. I mean, I think we all know this is a fundamentally asymmetrical problem. The people on the outside of the organization trying to get in are always going to have something of an advantage. You have, as the internal person, you've got to use every resource at your disposal. That's people, it's processes, it's training, and it's technology and tools. And they've all got to be able to work together. And that is just such a difficult equation to get right, given the constraints that all organizations, including healthcare organizations, work with. But I think as managers in the field, this is the big thing we've got to wrestle with. We've got a multi-dimensional problem here. How do you get everyone working together to address it and to solve it to the best of their advantage?
It's a good point. I mean, that alignment is critical, right? And I'm going to go back to this notion of if we can align around where do we need to spend our time and what gives us the most value as we plan our budgets and, look at hiring resources or not, or outsourcing. That's really one of the big challenges we have. So keep in mind that notion of risk, certainly vendor risk management and IoMT. Where do you spend your time and how can you get your arms around what risks do or don't exist in your environment? Oscar, any parting thoughts from you? I need a rainbow here. No,
I don't know if I can give you a rainbow, but I can tell you when you look at the title of this webinar, we talk about cyber warfare. I'm sure some folks looked at it and said, wow, that's kind of alarmist. Here we go again. We're in healthcare. We understand that there's conflict, between Russia and the Ukraine. That's happening, but we're in healthcare. If at any point, if you work in healthcare and you're not really sure, look, am I a potential target? Can I be collateral damage? as a result of this cyber warfare, just take a look at what happened in Costa Rica. People aren't really looking at that. That was a prime example. You think, well, Costa Rica, hey, that might have been an opportunity for you talked about the cyber crime gangs to test the waters. How far can I go? They basically crippled a whole sovereign country.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think, yeah, one thing to point out quick, right, about Costa Rica is they actually have, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but one of the highest levels of care that exists in the world. But there's also a high level of adoption of technologies, right, and an effective use of it. But now, when that goes away, what happens? And are we prepared? And what do we do? And what could have we done to prevent that? Is a great question. And what can we learn?
Right. So I'll give you at least a little silver lining, not a rainbow. The fact is that we're having these conversations. It's being brought up more in the forefront. That's a step in the right direction. Now we got to take action. Talk is cheap.
I agree. And with that, guess who's here? Tony.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Martin and Oscar. Great presentation today. A lot of good information was passed to all of our members. And I'd like to say, join our chapter. Here I come with my promotion again. I'd like to see more people be part of our chapter, come in for more of these events that we're putting together. And we're always looking for volunteers. We are planning some other events coming up here in the very near future. And if anybody is interested in golf, we will be doing a golf outing in September where you can network with some of your peers. We will also have some additional virtual presentations during August, September, October, and November. They're all in the works. We just need to make sure that we lock down the dates and times for all of them. Please visit our site. And again, gentlemen, thank you very much. Very informative. Pleasure to have you all part of it. And I'll
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you're
Thank
very
you.
welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.